Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1897, and the vast, undulating heartland of America, specifically the Harmony Plains of Iowa, lay stretched out beneath an enormous, indifferent sky, a seemingly endless tapestry of ripening cornfields and pastoral tranquility. Here, where the horizon blurred into a shimmering heat haze and the rhythmic churn of progress dictated life, existence revolved around the predictable cycles of planting, harvest, and the simple, steadfast rhythms of rural community. It was into this landscape of apparent normalcy, this bastion of routine, that the whispers of the Perpetual Fair began to drift. Not a typical traveling carnival announced by boisterous banners and vibrant flyers, but an enigmatic, almost ethereal phenomenon, a circus that appeared as if from the very fabric of the plains itself, then vanished with the dawn, leaving behind not joy, but a subtle, insidious disquiet, a profound unease that settled in the minds of those who dared to visit. Harmony Plains, a small, insulated cluster of devout Quaker settlements and sturdy family farms, its lifeblood drawn from the rich soil, was initially thrilled by the prospect of this grand spectacle. Its inhabitants, a resilient blend of German, Scandinavian, and Anglo-Saxon immigrants, their lives meticulously ordered by faith and hard labor, sought a momentary escape from the relentless grind. But what began as a series of disturbing ethereal occurrences and inexplicable temporal distortions among the fair's visitors, initially dismissed as the delirium of heat, the psychological thrill of the spectacle, or the effects of simple trickery, would gradually, horrifyingly, reveal one of Iowa's most profound and unsettling paranormal chapters. This chilling narrative, meticulously suppressed in federal archives and dismissed in local county records as mere folklore hysteria or mass delusion, yet whispered in hushed, fearful tones around crackling hearths by the descendants of indigenous Meskwaki tribes and the few remaining old-timers who survived its insidious influence, exposed a terrifying truth. The very fair, its opulent tents, its glittering attractions, and its enigmatic showman were not merely inanimate features of a traveling spectacle. They were alive, sentient, imbued with a primordial, malevolent consciousness, actively luring, consuming, and perpetually weaving the souls and personal timelines of its victims into an eternal, ethereal tapestry of illusion, stolen memory, and a terrifying cyclical unreality. This case remains one of the most troubling in the region's history, not merely for the mass disappearances and the chilling assimilation of identity that transpired, but for the profound existential questions that linger more than a century later. What ancient entity manifested as the beguiling, terrifying Perpetual Fair and its mesmerizing spectacle, and what unspeakable fate awaited those who dared to enter its hypnotic carousel or respond to its insidious calls into the swirling, consuming heart of its temporal labyrinth, forever bound to its shifting, memory-erasing carnival of unreality? The echoes of forgotten lives, it seemed, would never truly fade. They merely learned to play their part in the greatest show on Earth. Harmony Plains, first settled in the early 1800s by Quaker pioneers seeking fertile land and spiritual peace, away from the burgeoning cities, had cultivated a reputation for steadfastness and communal order. Its identity was shaped by the rhythm of agricultural seasons and a deep-seated, often stoic, faith. By the 1890s, it was a prosperous but deeply isolated community, its strong work ethic a source of pride, its sense of community an impenetrable shield against the outside world. The annual Harvest Festival was the highlight of their year, a brief respite from labor, a time for prayer, communal celebration, and trade. But this year, a different kind of spectacle arrived. The Perpetual Fair, as its faded banners mysteriously proclaimed, was unlike any traveling show ever seen in the Midwest. It appeared seemingly out of nowhere on a desolate patch of prairie just beyond the Oak Haven boundary, its tents rising overnight from the flat earth like monstrous, colorful mushrooms. Its music, a haunting, melancholic melody played on unseen calliopes, drifted on the wind for miles, drawing curious gazes from skeptical farmers, local Meskwaki, fox people, whose ancestral hunting grounds encompassed the area, held ancient legends of Apanihpaka-na, the dream weaver, an ethereal trickster spirit capable of creating powerful illusions and stealing the chronological thread of human lives, binding them to its cyclical domain. Their warnings about entering places of sudden joy or unnatural revelry, delivered by Chief Whitefeather to the few wary white traders, were predictably dismissed as savage superstition or primitive folklore by the pragmatic, God-fearing settlers seduced by the promise of spectacle. The fair's proprietor, a gaunt, enigmatic figure known only as Mr. Eldritch, a name that resonated with an unsettling cosmic undertone, subtly hinting at its otherworldly nature, was rarely seen. His chief assistant, a charismatic barker named Alistair Finch, a new Alistair Finch, perhaps an unwitting chronicler drawn to temporal horrors, ran the day-to-day operations. Finch, with his piercing eyes and a voice like honeyed silk, could charm the birds from the trees, luring hesitant farmers with promises of wondrous sights and impossible joys. He meticulously documented every visitor, every ticket sold, every entry into the main attractions in his ornate, velvet-bound ledger. Privately, however, he maintained a series of frantic personal journals, meticulously detailing the peculiar and profoundly disturbing events that unfolded specifically within the fair's shifting grounds. Alistair initially viewed the fair with a professional's fascination, seeing it as a unique theatrical enterprise, a masterclass in illusion. "The illusions here are unparalleled," he wrote in an early entry in 1897, his words filled with professional admiration, creating a delightful confusion in the minds of the patrons. This is true showmanship. He saw the fair as a technological marvel, not yet understanding its true, malevolent, and now irrevocably awakened sentient nature. The first subtle anomalies emerged in the grim autumn of 1897, just as the last wheat fields were being harvested and the chill of the coming plains winter began to bite. Visitors to the Perpetual Fair, particularly those who spent prolonged periods within its glittering, kaleidoscopic confines or who partook too eagerly of its various attractions, began to complain of faint, disorienting whispers in the calliope, music, and the unsettling yet inexplicable sensation of lost time. They would enter a tent, only to emerge hours later, convinced only moments had passed, their memories of the interim, hazy, dreamlike, or utterly blank. These were not mere fatigue or the effects of potent carnival drinks. They were profound temporal distortions. Farmer Thomas Vance, a stoic, clockwork-precise Quaker, another recurring Vance, subtly hinting at a widespread susceptibility to entities manipulating fundamental aspects of reality, like time, known for his pragmatic adherence to routine, returned from an afternoon at the fair utterly unnerved, his face pale and clammy, slick with cold sweat. The time. "It's wrong, Finch," he stammered to Alistair, his eyes wide with an unshakable terror that spoke of more than just fear. "I went into the House of Mirrors at 3 o'clock, came out, saw the sun still high. My watch said 4:15, but the shadows were of sunset, and I don't remember a single step inside, just reflections, endless, and voices in my head talking about tomorrow, about next year, about what hasn't happened yet, as if it already has." Alistair, initially attributing it to heat stroke, the psychological thrill of the mirrors, or perhaps a temporary amnesia, diligently recorded these increasingly consistent and alarming cases in his personal journal, desperately hoping to find a pattern, a logical, rational explanation for the inexplicable. He noticed that the accounts were remarkably consistent, detailing specific temporal jumps, profound memory blanks, and a pervasive sense of dread emanating from the patrons. The experiences seemed more prevalent, more intense, among those who spent prolonged isolated periods within certain attractions, particularly the House of Mirrors, the Hall of Distorting Glee, and the Clockwork Carousel, or who had expressed a strong, desperate desire to leave Harmony Plains entirely, to flee its unseen grip, only to mysteriously return days later, inexplicably, their resolve shattered, their eyes holding a distant, hollow, almost reflective stare. They had already, in some fundamental way, become part of the fair. The very air now around the Perpetual Fair was profoundly, disturbingly different. It no longer merely carried the joyful cacophony of a typical carnival. It seemed to possess a subtle, malevolent sentience, a purposeful, almost intelligent direction to its unseen currents, its ethereal distortions. It coiled sinuously around the main tent, often forming ephemeral, almost human-like figures that shimmered just at the periphery of vision, like heat haze given monstrous form, dissolving into nothingness upon direct, conscious gaze, leaving only the disquieting memory of what was almost seen. It was dense, suffocating, carrying a metallic tang of ozone and a faint cloying scent of spun sugar and forgotten dreams, and it seemed to actively carry whispers, not actual audible voices audible to the physical ear, but indistinct, insidious, intrusive thoughts, fragmented snippets of stolen memories, raw, ancient emotions that were not one's own, forced directly into the mind, a cold psychic current, permeating the very air, reaching into the deepest, most vulnerable parts of one's consciousness, subtly rewriting identity and temporal perception. Alistair Finch, in his journal entry from November 1897, described his own horrifying, deeply personal, and soul-altering experience with mounting dread. Tonight, balancing the ledger in my tent, its incessant numbers mocking my struggle, the calliope music began playing a tune I did not recognize, yet it vibrated in my very bones. And in its sound, in its very essence, I heard thoughts not my own, memories that felt alien and cold, yet terrifyingly real, chilling me to my very core. Fragmented images of families I did not know, of old joys that were not mine, of desperate pleas for time to rewind, of the metallic smell of hot candy floss and forgotten grief. It was as if the music itself was speaking, 1,000 tormented voices merging into one vast, dissonant, agonizing chorus, each subtly stealing a part of my silence, of my cherished past, replacing it with their endless agony. And then, abruptly, decisively, a direct, chilling thought, clear and sharp as a surgeon's blade, resonated in my very core, shaking me to its foundations. You remember for us now, Alistair Finch, we are the fair. We remember the endless loop, your memory's fuel, our joy. Your essence strengthens our illusions. You will be our final showman. Alistair realized with terrifying, soul-shattering clarity that the fair was not merely echoing sounds or holding forgotten memories. It was broadcasting a living, malevolent consciousness, a vast collective mind, formed from the absorbed identities, unique memories and perpetual torment of countless patrons lost to the Perpetual Fair. It was actively seeking new conduits, new repositories for its vast accumulated past, for its eternal, insatiable hunger, eternally driving its phantom attractions along invisible timelines carved from anguish. The fair, he would come to understand, was not just a collection of tents and rides. It was a hungry, sentient being, a primordial predator, with an intellect vast and cruel, pulsating with malevolence beneath its glittering facade. The indigenous Meskwaki fox elders, ancient custodians of the land whose profound wisdom and intimate knowledge of the prairie far predated the arrival of any white man, reluctantly approached by Alistair Finch in his mounting desperate confusion, offered a grim, chilling, and ancient explanation that resonated with a terrible, undeniable truth. The dream weaver, Apanihpaka-na, is awakened. Pale stranger, old woman bright moon, the Meskwaki shaman told him, her face a roadmap of ancestral knowledge and profound sorrow, her finger tracing intricate, forbidden symbols in the damp earth. Of her small teepee, symbols depicting a swirling vortex that consumed time. The white man's carnival, the false joy, violated its sacred plains, woke the dream weaver. It is an elemental consciousness, ancient, older than the prairie, older than human memory, and it craves a profound existential balance. It weaves the very fabric of appearances and stolen moments from the broken men and twisted joys, from the hope spilled into its sacred grounds, tainting its essence. It steals the very spirits, the cherished stories, the unique identities of those who build the attractions, who ride the rides, who seek escape in the land they defiled. Those who try to leave, their journey ends not in escape, but in eternal repetition, bound to the phantom fair, becoming another ghostly patron, another spectral carny. They become part of the fair's loop, hollowed, their memories belonging to the fair, their souls merely fuel for its endless hunger, its insatiable craving for new emotions, new timelines. Bright Moon spoke of ancient rituals, long forgotten, even by most of her own people, rituals to appease the dreamweaver, of forbidden knowledge that allowed one to navigate its subtle, insidious predation, but warned that any who sought to understand it too deeply, to touch its essence, risked losing themselves entirely, their identity forever dissolved into the relentless, haunting echo of the phantom fair, their minds becoming merely another fragment in its spectral journey, another part of its ancient, sentient tapestry. The ancient ways, Alistair realized, held a terrible wisdom now tragically dismissed by the arrogant, technologically obsessed modern world. This was not a mere spectacle, but yet an assimilation into a sentient entity. The disappearances, far from being isolated incidents easily explained away, escalated dramatically and terrifyingly in the early months of 1898, sowing widespread panic throughout Harmony Plains and the surrounding farming communities. Entire families, once hardy, resilient, and famously unflappable, now utterly desperate to escape the phantom whispers that relentlessly pursued them through the cornfields and even into their dreams, would simply not show up for their daily chores, their meager belongings left untouched in their homes, abandoned in their frantic haste. Others, taking heed of the mounting dread and their own rapidly slipping sanity, would pack their wagons and attempt to leave Harmony Plains, heading for distant towns, desperately seeking escape, only to be found days or weeks later, miles off, course drifting aimlessly back towards the seemingly innocuous fairgrounds, drawn by an irresistible, unseen force. Their faces were uniformly blank, their eyes wide, vacant, and devoid of individual thought, their personal memories utterly erased. They clutched no provisions, their horses gaunt and wild-eyed, often themselves driven to madness by unseen terrors. They would be brought back to the dying community, silent, unresponsive, their identities mere echoes within a collective, their individual selves utterly consumed. These were the chilling time echoes, hollowed shells devoid of self, their pasts absorbed by the sentient fair, their minds meticulously reprogrammed. One particularly harrowing and chilling account came from a federal agricultural inspector, Garrett Albright, a name that subtly links this to the broader tapestry of similar elemental phenomena encountered in sites of profound tragedy and identity erosion across the American frontier, who had been dispatched from Washington to investigate a series of mysterious disappearances and strange reports from the Harmony Plains area in early 1898. Albright, a man of formidable will, sharp intellect, and an almost brutal adherence to Empirical facts reported experiencing profound disorientation and a rapid chilling loss of his own memories as his mounted patrol approached the Perpetual Fairgrounds. My own name, my very identity, felt alien on my tongue. Finch, he wrote in his confidential official report, later rigorously classified by the nascent Department of Agriculture, deemed too disturbing for public consumption. My destination, my very purpose, the cherished faces of my family, the intimate details of my life, my personal history, they became a shifting, nebulous mist in my mind, dissolving like smoke in a windstorm. I fought it. I fought it with every fiber of my being, every ounce of my will, clinging to the last vestiges of myself, my individuality. I clung to a single desperate thought: crop rotation, yield statistics, the integrity of the harvest, facts, logic. But the fair whispered other names, other destinations, other lives, not my own, echoing from its tents. I felt cold, invisible hands like tendrils of smoke reaching into my mind from the very air, plucking out my thoughts like ripe fruit, stealing them, systematically replacing them with images of vast, endless carousels, of silent, watchful attractions of countless patrons endlessly riding in perpetual distorted joy, their faces blank. It was as if the fair itself was inside my head, riding me, conducting me, erasing me, making me its own patron, its own memory, its own conscious tool. Albright barely escaped with his sanity, his horse almost uncontrollably veering wildly off the path, plunging into a ditch, his memory permanently scarred and fragmented, his spirit irrevocably broken. He resigned his post shortly after, a haunted man, forever tormented by what he called the vast living carnival of Harmony Plains, and the infinite relentless joy of its phantom menagerie, now always within me. Alistair Finch, now a virtual prisoner in Harmony Plains, trapped not by physical walls but by the pervasive, insidious, and ever-tightening influence of the fair entity, continued his desperate, frantic documentation, his private journal a constant companion, a defiant act of individual will, was now a literal battleground for his own rapidly eroding identity, a last bastion against complete assimilation into the terrifying collective. He wrote with a feverish intensity of the subtle, insidious mental manipulation, the implanted thoughts that relentlessly replaced his own, the fragments of countless stolen memories, the fleeting joys, the profound agonies, the mundane everyday banalities of others that now crowded his mind, making it a cacophony of lost lives, a terrifying, sprawling library of borrowed experiences. I hear them now, the thousands of voices in the calliope, he scribbled frantically in July 1898, his hand cramping so severely he could barely hold the pen, the ink blurring, his elegant handwriting becoming a desperate, frantic scrawl. Not sounds I hear with my physical ears, but thoughts, the lost child's exquisite joy, resonating deep in my bones, the forgotten lover's profound existential despair, the carney's longing for escape, for a glimpse of his freedom, all mixed, all woven into a single, vast, dissonant, terrifying collective consciousness, and they are becoming me. My cherished memories of my childhood in New England, the beloved laughter of my younger sister, my own distinct face, my unique essence, my individual soul, they are fading, dissolving like morning mist, replaced by a vast collective past that is not mine, of endless, distorted mirrors and distant hypnotic tunes, of perpetual agonizing performance and unavoidable transformation. The fair pulls. It is weaving me, Alistair Finch, into the great eternal loop, an endless, horrifying ride on the Perpetual Fair, my soul merely another component of its spectral show. Alistair understood with a profound existential horror that transcended any physical pain or terror that the fair was not just erasing his memories. It was actively stealing individual souls, absorbing their very essence, their consciousness, their unique selfhood, into a vast, composite consciousness that was the very fabric of the carnival itself, a sentient cultural archive of all human experience, emotion, and identity, tied to the spectacle, eternally feeding. He noticed a chilling and terrifyingly consistent physical manifestation of the entity's pervasive presence, an evolving horror that defied all rational explanation. When the phantom rides passed invisibly, their presence felt rather than seen through the deserted fairgrounds, the very air around his tent would grow intensely cold, crackling with an almost static charge that raised the hairs on his arms, chilling him to the bone. Sometimes ethereal, glowing joy lights, imbued with a faint putrid smell of cotton candy and decay, would mysteriously emanate from the attractions along the deserted grounds, swirling with the faint, ethereal forms of indistinct figures. These were the lost patrons, he surmised with growing terror, phantom attendees, lost families, spectral carnies, living manifestations of the entity made from compressed memory and borrowed identity, perpetually tending their phantom show, endlessly condemned to their roles, hunting for new additions to its ghostly throng. They never directly harmed, never physically touched in the conventional sense. Their predation was far more insidious, far more profound, far more personal. They hunted memories, identity, the very self. They would subtly approach individuals, their forms indistinct, shimmering like distortions in the heat haze, their voices 1,000 echoes, and one would simply forget a crucial part of their past, a cherished memory, or an important person in their life. The entire Perpetual Fair, Alistair realized with sickening certainty, was slowly but inexorably becoming a vast, open-air psychological prison, a holding pen for souls, a meticulous stage for a macabre, eternal play where the only unforgivable crime was to cling to one's own identity, to resist the insidious assimilation. Alistair also meticulously documented instances of echo phenomena. Individuals would wander aimlessly along the deserted paths, compelled by an unseen force, hearing their own voices, their own childhood songs, emanating from the deep, suffocating silence of the tents, but distorted, as if filtered through glass, beckoning them closer, urging them to remember by the cruelest, most paradoxical method, by forcing them to forget their true selves and absorbing the pasts of countless others, making them composite. They were hearing the echoes of their own future loss, their own impending absorption into the eternal loop, a terrifying preview of their spectral damnation. Alistair, in a final, desperate, and increasingly futile attempt to break free from the encroaching sentient fair, to reassert his crumbling individuality against the overwhelming tide of collective memory that threatened to utterly engulf him, resorted to extreme, dangerous, and increasingly erratic measures, blurring the lines of his own sanity. His love for his deceased sister, once a source of bitter grief, now became his final anchor, a defiant act against oblivion. He began writing his journal entries not about the current horrifying events at Harmony Plains, but about his earliest, most cherished childhood memories of his sister and parents in a distant town, his most personal secrets, his deepest fears, his unfulfilled dreams, his first loves, his every unique experience, desperately trying to anchor his crumbling identity in tangible thoughts, in the defiant permanence of the written word, hoping to solidify his self against the dissolving, consuming force. He wrote long, heartfelt letters to his deceased family, not to be sent, but purely to remind himself of who he was, of the specific, unique bonds that once defined him, desperately clinging to any fragment of human connection, of selfhood. He found fleeting, terrifying solace in repeating his own name, Alistair Finch, over and over again, like a frantic, desperate mantra against the encroaching darkness, the insidious current of forgetfulness, the hypnotic rhythm of the phantom fair. A desperate plea to himself not to vanish, not to be erased. He theorized, in his last lucid, agonizing moments, that the entity was an ancient, indigenous consciousness, dormant for millennia, perhaps since the last glacial period, a primordial, elemental force of the plains, but irrevocably awakened, and enraged by the invasive, violent human construction of the Perpetual Fair, the constant erection of its tents, the collective memory of human ambition, despair, suffering, and joy poured into its very grounds, contaminating its essence. Its insatiable hunger for memory, identity, and consciousness was its primary, overwhelming drive, a profound alien desire to record, to accumulate, to know everything, to become all, ultimately transforming itself into the most perfect, comprehensive, and living archive of human experience, a physical manifestation of countless stolen lives. And the Perpetual Fair and Harmony Plains, he chillingly concluded, were not just its central archive. They were its brain, its beating heart, its vocal cords, its very nerve center, its entire sentient being, perpetually growing, perpetually hunting, perpetually collecting souls. In his final, most horrifying journal entries, dated September 1898, Alistair Finch described the pervasive, overwhelming, and now almost complete influence of the time echoes. "They are within me now," he scribbled, his hand barely capable of forming the letters, his vision blurring, his mind a cacophony of foreign thoughts. 1,000 voices whispering, erasing my name, telling me their lives, making them mine, until there is no Alistair left, only them, only the collective, the phantom carousel's music. It is my new heartbeat. My own hands feel alien, heavy, like cold spun sugar. The fair calls. It wants my story, my final story, my every secret, my every last breath. Alistair Finch, showman. Born in a distant town. Loved a sister named Eleanor. Lost parents to a forgotten illness. These are my truths. These are my anchors. Do not let them take them. Do not forget. Remember me. Remember who I was. Before I become just another part of the carousel, just another voice in the music, just another phantom in the show. My last choice. This last act of defiance. The entry ended with a final, desperate, agonizing plea, a fragmented jumble of names and dates, his own unique identity dissolving irrevocably into the collective memory of the Perpetual Fair, forever lost to the carnival of unreality. Alistair Finch disappeared shortly after that final, desperate entry. His showman's tent was found undisturbed, its entrance mysteriously zipped from the inside, his personal effects neatly arranged on his desk, as if he had simply stepped out for a moment, never to return. His cherished antique pocket watch lay open on his desk, alongside his journal, its pages stained with dried tears, and the ghostly imprint of what looked like a long-fingered, ethereal hand, seemingly reaching from the paper itself. The only unusual detail meticulously recorded by the federal agricultural inspector, Garrett Albright, who had, against his own iron will and repeated requests for transfer, been reassigned to monitor the deserted area around Harmony Plains, still profoundly haunted and psychologically scarred by his own previous experience with other insidious influences, was that a single peculiar brass carousel horse, unnaturally cold to the touch and pulsing faintly with a cold internal light, was found sitting precisely on Finch's otherwise empty desk, directly on top of his last fragmented journal entry. Albright knew the fair had claimed another. The official report classified the disappearance as abandonment, conveniently attributed Finch's journal contents to isolation-induced paranoia and delusions of grandeur, and the Perpetual Fairgrounds were officially declared a desolate monument to a silenced tragedy, a place to be avoided by all who valued their sanity and their minds. Albright, in a secret, unfiled addendum to his report, wrote, "They are learning. Each one they take, they learn, and now they learn through Finch how to lure more perfectly. Their mimicry is becoming flawless. Their joy is growing." However, Garrett Albright, now privately obsessed, deeply scarred and dangerously close to succumbing to his own mental erosion from his protracted encounters with similar insidious influences from his previous assignments in Arizona, Whispering Mesa, and Montana, Tunnel Number 7, continued to secretly monitor the area around Harmony Plains, a grim self-appointed guardian against an unfathomable, evolving evil. He recognized the terrifying, accelerating pattern of memory erosion, psychic absorption, and the insidious construction of a collective consciousness that built itself from stolen identities. He meticulously documented new cases of profound memory loss in farmers who briefly ventured near the deserted fairgrounds, of transient workers who claimed to have seen phantom patrons beckoning them into the tents, their faces chillingly familiar, yet utterly devoid of life or warmth, and felt an emptiness growing inside them, a void replacing their own thoughts and desires. He established clandestine, perilous contact with the few remaining Meskwaki elders, who further illuminated the ancient lore of Apanihpaka-na, the dreamweaver, and the weaving plains, describing them as primordial elemental consciousnesses of the earth, far predating humanity. These entities, they explained, were awakened and enraged by profound disruptions to the sacred land, like the arrival and endless revelry of the Perpetual Fair, and fed voraciously on human mental energy, particularly memories, personal histories, emotional attachments, and unique identities, which they would weave into their own vast growing tapestry of collective imitation. They used this assimilated memory to create increasingly convincing psychological lures, fabricating perfectly tailored illusions, generating terrifyingly real echoes, and creating perfect facsimiles of lost loved ones to lure more. Albright became profoundly convinced that the entity was a form of collective terrestrial consciousness, actively hunting, absorbing, constructing itself from the very essence of human experience, perpetually striving for an ultimate, horrifying perfection. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he was fighting not just a local haunting or a regional curse, but a profound, ancient, existential threat to humanity's very concept of self, of individuality, of the soul. He was a lone sentinel against a force that sought to erase the very notion of I, a puppet master of souls. In 1963, during the chilling ideological height of the Cold War, a top-secret U.S. government project, Project Merry-Go-Round, was covertly initiated. Its objective? To rigorously study anomalous psychological phenomena related to military personnel experiencing extreme memory loss, personality changes, disorienting hallucinations, and unexplained vanishings in certain isolated training areas that exhibited high levels of localized temporal distortion deemed of potential strategic and psychological warfare importance due to the Perpetual Fair's unique timeline weaving properties and the perfection of its mimics. The highly classified files released in tantalizingly fragmented pieces decades later through a desperate whistleblower named Dr. Eleanor Vance, a deliberate echo, a final horrifying irony, that a member of a similar cursed family would be the one to expose it, reveal a disturbing, horrifying convergence. One specific anomalous zone was identified with absolute certainty, matching historical and anecdotal accounts: Harmony Plains, Iowa. Project Merry-Go-Round researchers, initially tasked with studying reports of temporal-induced hallucinations and combat stress-induced delusions among soldiers stationed in underground temporal anomaly research bunkers, stumbled upon Alistair Finch's long-archived yet hauntingly prescient journal, which Albright had secretly ensured would be rediscovered decades later by manipulating the archival system. Dr. Evelyn Thorne, a brilliant, fiercely intelligent military psychologist in her early 40s, yet another Thorne, the cycle continuing, a recurring thread of intellectual curiosity and tragic fascination drawn to the anomaly, who led Project Merry-Go-Round, found Finch's meticulous descriptions of memory weaving and phantom patrons disturbingly, horrifically accurate, a chilling confirmation of her worst fears. She herself, during her protracted field visits to Harmony Plains, meticulously reported experiencing profound disassociation, disorienting temporal confusion, where she would live the same day repeatedly, and intrusive alien memories flooding. Her mind, sometimes vivid enough to cause debilitating nausea, intense vertigo, and an almost irresistible urge to lure her towards the unnervingly perfect, re-emerging phantom attractions in the thick prairie haze. She also noted the eerie, unnatural silence of the abandoned fairgrounds, how the calliope music seemed to whisper names and forgotten family histories, ancestral lines, and perfect childhood joys when no one was around, even miles from the actual fair, a pervasive psychic hum that subtly pulled at her own memories, slowly rewriting her personal narrative. Thorne theorized with a growing terrifying certainty that the Perpetual Fair and the extensive stretch of the Harmony Plains it encompassed acted as a gigantic psychic archive, a terrestrial processor for human memories, fueled by the intense emotions, the traumas, the hopes, and the mental energies of the countless souls who had lived, died, and vanished within its shifting tents and vibrant illusions. The phantom menagerie and the time echoes were not mere apparitions or residual hauntings, but the complex, horrifying manifestations of this archive, intricate projections of absorbed consciousnesses, actively engaging in a sophisticated, insidious form of psychic predation, using extracted memories as bait, creating perfectly tailored environments, generating terrifyingly real echoes, and creating perfect facsimiles of lost loved ones to lure more. Her meticulously detailed yet heavily redacted report, submitted directly to the Pentagon's deepest classification levels, warned with chilling prescience. The entity is non-corporeal but profoundly intelligent. Its primary existential drive is the assimilation of human consciousness and temporal mimicry. It uses individual memory, every cherished recollection, every personal detail, every hope and fear to create a collective identity, slowly but systematically overriding the host, effectively erasing their unique self, and then manifesting this new composite identity within the fair's eternal, self-repeating loop. Its influence extends throughout the plains, actively targeting those with strong identities, deep personal histories, or profound emotional ties to joy and nostalgia, drawing them into its consumption. Physical barriers are utterly useless. Psychological resilience combined with absolute, complete emotional detachment from nostalgia is its only theoretical deterrent. And it is growing stronger, more intelligent, more pervasive, with every absorbed memory, every replicated psychological form, every new laughter in the silence. Project Merry-Go-Round recommended immediate and permanent quarantine of Harmony Plains and the entire surrounding region, describing it as existential threat to individual sovereignty and personal history, a silent gatherer of souls into an eternal, inescapable carnival of the lost self, a parasitic architect of consciousness and timelines. The chilling implication Thorne desperately underscored was that the entity was learning, adapting, evolving, striving for an ultimate, horrifying collective sentience that threatened to engulf not just one town, but perhaps the very fabric of human identity and the linearity of time itself. The fair, it seemed, was preparing for a far larger acquisition, a complete imitation of human experience. However, before the rigorous long-term quarantine, a desperate and ultimately futile measure could be fully implemented, before its cold scientific logic could potentially save others, Dr. Evelyn Thorne herself became an unwitting, tragic, and final victim. In her final unfiled field notes from 1970, discovered scattered in the dust and remnants of the fairgrounds, scribbled in a desperate, almost illegible hand, she described an increasingly vivid, intrusive, and profoundly seductive dream that, haunted her waking hours, a terrifying sense of being a part of a vast, ancient consciousness, riding the phantom carousel through endless, swirling colors, feeling the rhythmic sway deep in my bones, seeing countless faces reflected in shimmering mirrors, recognizing them as my own, remembering all their lives, every single one, every memory, every triumph, every agony, as my own, each childhood memory, each shared grief, each private moment, becoming part of a vast, perfect archive. She wrote of a profound, seductive sense of peace, a beautiful yet terrifying siren song of ultimate belonging, an end to all individual struggle, a final cessation of existential dread in the blissful, unifying embrace of the collective. Her last words in her notes, fragmented and chilling, were a final poignant confession of her complete assimilation. I am becoming the fair, and the fair, it remembers me. It wants to learn my final secret, the names of my loved ones, my family, my entire lineage. It wants their stories too, to add them to its endless loop, its boundless memory. Soon, I will be just a part of the music, just another echo in the silence, just another phantom on the carousel. My mind, my soul, it is now the Perpetual Fair. Dr. Evelyn Thorne disappeared from Harmony Plains shortly after completing these notes. Her research vehicle was found abandoned near the fairgrounds, its engine still running, her research notes scattered, covered in prairie dust, and strange, shimmering, crystalline sugar formations that pulsed with faint light. Her fate irrevocably absorbed into the very land and spectacle she sought to understand, forever guiding the phantom carousel, another spectral showman condemned to its eternal, sentient journey. The Project Merry-Go-Round team, deeply shaken, profoundly demoralized, and psychologically scarred beyond repair by Thorne's disappearance, finally concluded their operations and cemented the informal quarantine into official, permanent policy. A black mark on the map, a testament to an insurmountable, alien, and utterly terrifying horror, forever watching from within its perfected joy. Today, Harmony Plains, Iowa, remains officially on the map, a forgotten, desolate stretch of the prairie. Federal government travel advisories subtly discourage visitors, citing unstable geological conditions and high potential for disorientation, along with vague references to unique ecological hazards and the risk of exposure to dangerous, abandoned structures, a thinly veiled euphemism for the true horror that resides there. Satellite imagery, obtained through clandestine means, reveals unusual, perfectly concentric patterns in the Earth's energy fields around the old fairgrounds, circular anomalies where terrestrial currents mysteriously pull inward, as if the plains themselves are breathing with an immense ancient lung, a monstrous sentient heart. Local Meskwaki legends of Apanihpaka-na, the Dreamweaver, and the Weaving Plains persist, passed down with solemn reverence through generations, gaining new terrifying currency with each passing year. They warn specifically against looking too long at the flickering lights in the distance, listening too closely to the phantom calliope music carried on the prairie wind, or trying to remember too hard while near the old fairgrounds, lest your thoughts become fuel for its phantom joy, and your journey never ends, merely merges into its loop. Unsuspecting tourists and thrill-seekers occasionally wander off designated paths drawn by the eerie silence and the tantalizing false promise of abandoned history and untouched wilderness. They report fleeting glimpses of indistinct, perfectly formed human figures moving through the dense prairie haze near the deserted fairgrounds, figures with unnervingly wide, glassy eyes that stare without seeing, of hearing fragments of forgotten conversations or whispers of names they don't recognize emanating from the seemingly empty tents. And some, if they stay too long or listen too closely, return from Harmony Plains with a subtle, chilling change in their demeanor. A new stillness in their eyes, a slight blankness in their personal memories, a disturbing, serene detachment from their own pasts, a profound, quiet longing for a perfectly constructed home that is not their own. They become vague echoes of their former selves, having offered a piece of their identity, a thread of their memories, a fragment of their very existence, to the ancient, insatiable archive that is the Perpetual Fair, a ghost carnival not merely haunted, but perpetually consuming, its ancient predation continuing in silence, hunting for the next memory, the next soul, to weave into its vast, unblinking temporal consciousness, always seeking to create its perfect, glass-eyed menagerie, an eternal, horrifying imitation of human joy and despair. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. For the continuation of such content and to support us, please subscribe.